Hi, this is Jeremy Jansen, and I'd like to welcome you to the May 2010 issue of Reason Wizardry. First, you're going to notice that the format is a bit different this month. That's because we're using record, of course. And before you get too excited about that, or maybe unhappy about that, the reason that we're doing that isn't to use any record-specific features. It's actually just to take a widescreen video, since record is capable of having two racks side by side. So it's just an experiment this month, so definitely give me feedback on whether you liked it or you didn't like it, and we'll see if it's going to appear again in the future, or if I'll go back to the old format. Okay, so for content this month in the May issue, we're going to be talking about envelope followers. What an envelope follower basically is a tool that we can use to dynamically change effects based on the input amplitude level of incoming audio. So if we have a drum loop and we're using an envelope follower on that, that's going to modify whatever effect we want based on the volume of the drum loop. So if we use that on a filter, of course, that'd be kind of like the classic wah effect. So the filter is going to open when the amplitude of the input audio is high, and it's going to close when the amplitude is low. But of course there's much more to it than that, and there's multiple ways to create envelope followers in Reason. So we're going to go through that and also introduce you to some more interesting envelope following effects that are possible in Reason. Alright, let's get started. Alright, now I'm going to introduce you to the simplest variant of envelope following that we can do in Reason, and we'll move on from there to more advanced and complete implementation. But first we're going to start off by listening to this drum loop we've got. I may change that up later so it totally doesn't drive us crazy. So this Dr. Rex is hooked up to a combinator here. So first thing we're going to do is add a Scream 4. Okay, so once we're running a sound through a Scream 4, we've got an auto CV output. And basically what that is a built-in envelope follower. So it takes the input audio and checks the level of the audio, and based on that level sends an auto CV output. So let's try that with an effect, something a little bit different than the usual wah effect. Let's bring in BV512, and of course we're going to have to split the audio because we need it to go into the Scream 4 in order to get the auto CV output from it, but we also need it to go through the vocoder. So we're going to split it here. It's going to go into the Scream 4 and also into the vocoder. And we don't need the audio output from the Scream 4. We're just using it for that envelope follower CV. All right, so now we'll take the CV and we'll send it to the shift knob. Well, actually, first let's listen without the envelope follower here. Okay, so if we move the shift knob in EQ mode, that's moving all the bandpass filters up and down. It's kind of a subtle filtering sound. All right, now let's connect things up here. So you can plainly hear what's going on there. As the kick drum hits, of course, that's going to be the highest level of the loop, and that's basically increasing the shift knob up, and then of course it comes back down during the low portions of the loop. So that's as quick and dirty as an envelope follower that you can create in Reason. But it doesn't have some of the controls and complexity that you might want in an envelope follower. But of course, it's good to know if you just want something quick. All right, now we're going to move on and create a more complex implementation of an envelope follower. So we're going to start that out by creating a spider audio. And we'll bring our input signal into that. And then we're going to create an MClass compressor. We're going to send our input signal there. We're not going to use its audio output. We don't actually want a compressed signal. Instead, we're going to just send the input signal straight out. So it's not going to be modified at all right here. So now we don't actually have any compression going on, but you can see the input signal is still going through the compressor, so we can see how much compression there would be. So the trick here is to use the gain reduction CV out. You can use this basically as you would have used the Scream 4 auto CV out. The plus is that it's just more configurable. So we can connect that up to, say, the oscillator pitch on the Dr. Rex. And we can control the amount of modulation with the threshold knob here. Because of course, at this point, there's no compression happening. So there's no gain reduction being sent out by CV. So now if we slowly increase the threshold here, of course, we also have the attack and release controls, which are typical from an envelope follower in hardware form, or just the way you usually find them, because often you want to be able to control how quickly the modulation happens and how quickly it fades out. Unfortunately, it doesn't work too well. The times on the release and attack are quite short. You can see that just ranges from 1 to 100 milliseconds and 50 to 600. But even then, it doesn't seem like the release is actually taking 600 milliseconds. So to get true attack and release controls on our envelope follower, we're going to need to add something else and increase the complexity of our combinator. Now we're going to add on to our envelope follower so that we can get some attack and release controls. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually unrelated to that. I'm going to add an ECF filter that we're going to modulate with the envelope follower, just because it's very easy to hear the changes using the ECF. So to do that, instead of sending our input directly to our output, I'm going to send it through the ECF. And we'll just make sure that's working. Okay, it is. So now we're going to add a Thor. All right, so here's the theory Instead of sending our gain reduction CV output directly to whatever we want to modulate, for instance, directly to the filter frequency, we're going to send it through the Thor, where it's going to trigger the global envelope. So basically it's going to go like that. Input into the Thor and then output from the Thor. So we need to add some information to the mod matrix. So the CV input 1 is going to trigger the global envelope gate. And then the global envelope is going to go to CV output 1. And now we can use the attack, hold, decay controls of the envelope to modify how our envelope follower works. Let's hear how that sounds. So it's working fine. One added plus is that we can also use tempo synced envelopes with the global envelope here. Okay, so it's working, but you might have noticed it's not as dynamic as before. And that's because essentially we're just using the compressor gain reduction CV output to trigger the gate. And the gate is happening every time the compressor sends a CV out. So regardless of what the level of the CV out is, the gate is triggered. So what we can do to get around that, we want a more dynamic sound. So we want the global envelope sent out proportional to how much CV gain, or gain reduction rather, is happening. So in order to do that, we can scale this global envelope heading to the CV output. We can scale that by the CV input, because of course the CV input is the amount of gain reduction. So I've tested some different values here, and it turns out 100 doesn't work so well. 50 is actually a better choice, or somewhere in that region. So let's listen to how that sounds now. So you can hear now it's more reactive to the actual level of the audio rather than just triggering every time the compressor is hit. It's triggering with a different level every time the compressor is hit. Of course, we have the hold control as well, which can be nice. So now with the attack, hold, decay controls, in conjunction with the amount of envelope we're sending out, you pretty much have the whole range of envelope followed sounds at your fingertips. Of course, it's best to map some of these to Thor controls or combinator controls. And we're going to do a little bit of that next, as well as improving even further on our envelope follower. We're going to now start finalizing our envelope follower by adding some combinator and Thor rotary mappings. So I've already got them written in here, so we just have to do the actual programming behind them. So we'll start with rotary 1. We want that to go to the global envelope attack. And keep in mind that Thor modulations, as opposed to combinator modulations, are relative. That means that this modulation on this rotary is going to start where the slider actually is now. So if you want the full range of modulation, you actually have to lower it to 0. And now 0 corresponds to 0. So we'll also lower the decay, and we'll set up that one, rotary 2 going to global envelope decay at 100. And we're all done there. Okay, next we're going to get the envelope amount. And that, of course, is this value right here. So we have to get into the Thor programmer, rotary 1, scroll all the way down to mod 1 destination amount. And it's going to go from 0 to 100. And now we're going to add something else. Envelope frequency is something new. And what that's going to mean is that we're going to use a filter to set what frequency the envelope follower is triggered by. So I'll show you how that works. Close the programmer off. We're going to add another ECF filter. And we're not going to actually hear the effect of this filter. Basically, before the audio is sent into this compressor, and remember, we don't hear that audio, we're just using the gain reduction from it. Before it's sent into the compressor, it's going to be sent into the ECF. So just like that, that's a dead end for audio, but we're still using the CV output. And we're going to switch it to a bandpass filter. So basically with this, we can set up what frequencies trigger the envelope follower. So maybe in our drum loop, we're not so interested in having the kick drum trigger the envelope follower. Maybe we want the hi-hat or ride or snare drum. So with a bandpass filter, we can choose exactly where in the frequency range the compressor is going to get its signal, and in turn send its CV output that's going to create the envelope follower effect. So let's see if we can hear that. Okay, we need a little bit of decay on here, of course, right? And I believe this frequency would be the ride. And that would be more the kick drum. And I've actually made a small mistake here. We don't want to be changing this line in the mod matrix for our envelope amount. Of course, we want line 2. And here's an interesting side effect. I was actually planning on having the modulation range go from 0 to 100, but actually it's probably better from negative 100 to 100, because then we can get a reverse envelope effect. So 0 is right in the middle. And then to this direction, we've got the reversed envelope. So we have a more flexible envelope follower by using that bipolar modulation. And of course, we've now got the choice of what frequency is triggering the envelope follower. Alright, and now just to map this envelope frequency knob so we don't have to go down here to change it. So there's our envelope follower. It's very configurable. Of course, you're going to have to pay attention to your input levels very carefully, because an envelope follower by its nature is really sensitive to that. So you may have to add some gain or compression or lower your levels depending on the sound you're looking for before it goes into the envelope follower. So next, what we're going to do is just show a few more applications of what an envelope follower can affect, and we'll move on to a little bit of bonus material, I guess I'll say, after that. Now, the first additional application of envelope followers that we're going to look at is actually using the envelope follower to modulate a different instrument. So here we've still got our Dr. Rex loop, and we'll play it, and you can see that the gain reduction is happening, but we're not hearing anything. That's because I've added a mixer here and I've muted the drum signal. And I've added a maelstrom running through a unison. So that's what we're going to hear instead. It's kind of a really basic pad using the ambient chord 1 sound. So what we're going to do is take the envelope follower, which of course is output from CV1 on the Thor here, and we can send that to a variety of destinations and get some interesting and useful effects. So the first is a gating type effect that we can access by inputting the CV into the level parameter. So it's essentially being gated by the drum loop. If we change the amount here, we can get a little bit more of a smooth sound that doesn't go all the way down to zero volume in between. Okay, so next we could go shift. Modulate the shift knob here. Of course, we can still use our attack and decay controls. And our amount. Or even go in reverse. And we can change what frequency is triggering that envelope follower. There's the ride again. We can use the index parameter as well. Probably ambient chord isn't going to work the greatest for this. Let's try something else. What about finger symbol? I'm just choosing these randomly. So this is kind of more effect type sounds. Of course, as before, we can modulate the filter, and with the Maelstrom, we've got some different filter choices. Let's bring back our ambient chord. And there we're modulating the comb filter. Or we can go down to AM. So you can have one sound react to another in a dynamic and interesting way. Whether you're using the original sound in the background, like this drum loop, or whether you've muted that sound and you're just using it for kind of a modulation rhythm, either way, it's pretty useful. Here are a few more demonstrations of possible applications for the envelope follower using a little bit of a different technique. And so far what we've been doing is just sending the envelope follower CV output to CV input on some device. But of course, some devices, such as, say, RV7000, have a limited amount of CV inputs that don't really let you get in depth. So what we can do in these situations is use combinator modulations. So let's head into this RV7000. And let's map rotary 4 to, say, the dry-wet mix. And now let's route this up. So that we've got our input heading through the RV7000 into the mixer here, which is actually somewhat redundant in this patch. And then, of course, through the mixer goes to the output. So now we've got our rotary 4 mapped to dry wet, and we can modulate that knob with our envelope follower. So let's have a listen here. So using the combinator modulations in conjunction with the envelope follower, you have access to virtually any parameter in Reason to be able to modulate that with the envelope follower. And even better, you can visualize the effect. So it's that much easier to tweak your input levels. So it's almost like some kind of gated reverb sound, but of course it's gated to the drum loop itself. Even though we're in record and I said I wasn't going to use any record specific stuff, I can't help but just show you one more possible application for the envelope follower. Let's add in a Line6 bass amp, and you can't modulate anything via CV on the Line6 bass amp. So what if we wanted to send our signal through the Line6 bass amp and modulate the drive knob? That's how it sounds without any modulation. And of course we can head into the bass amp, set up rotary 4, controlling drive. And we have an envelope followed Line6 bass amp. How cool is that? All right, now we're at the end of the issue and we've reached the bonus, and you can probably already see what the bonus is. I'm going to give you a sneak peek at a patch from our upcoming refill, Filter Research 2, that uses some of the techniques that we've been talking about today as far as envelope following. So I've got the same drum loop. Sorry, I promised I was going to change it, but I kind of forgot, and now I'm somewhat used to it. And since we've heard it so much, let's hear it run through the freestyle filter effect, which was created by myself, and let's get started with it. So we've got a wet-dry knob here, so let's fade in the wet effect. So it sounds pretty good, but you know, looks pretty standard with the combinator controls here. But let's open things up, and you can see I've been working on adding many different useful controls right at your fingertips, because frankly there's not enough combinator controls for really complex patches. And what I mean by really complex, there's a lot in here. I can't describe everything that's going on. That'd be too difficult and too much for really just this bonus sneak peek. But I'm going to play a little bit more with the controls here and give you a bit more of a idea of what's going on. We've got 3 filters here: low pass, band pass, and high pass. And of course this mixer up top allows us to mix them any way we'd like. We've got some input and output controls. We've got our envelope follower sensitivity controls. And we've got filter FM, which is what you're hearing, that grittiness. Let's turn that off for a moment. We either have an oscillator as the source of the filter FM, or we can actually filter FM based on the envelope follower. We also have some amplitude modulation. Controls here. So we can remove that from one band, let's say the high pass band. Of course, different slope controls. The slopes are configurable in a sense that they're actually 2 filters. If you choose the 24 dB, then you get 1 filter that you can move around. And if you choose the 12 dB, you actually have 2 12 dB filters that are independently movable using the master and slave cutoff. We can even have reverse amplitude modulation. And I'm not going to describe the rest of it. I'll leave it there. That's the freestyle filter from Filter Research 2. Coming fairly soon, but I'm not going to rush it because there's a lot of patches on this level of complexity, and I want them to be as user-friendly as possible with as many interesting and usable controls at your fingertips as possible. You know, it's easy to say the next refill is always going to be the best one that Nucleus Sound Lab has ever created, but I really do believe that about this refill. It's going to push effect sounds in Reason and Record much farther than they've ever been pushed. So I hope you enjoyed that sneak peek at Filter Research 2. That brings us to the end of the May issue. Thanks so much for watching. As always, this is Jeremy Jansen. Cheers.